The Geulah is unfolding. Not only is it unfolding, it is indelibly built in to the process of Golus right from the start. With regards to the haftarahs that we read on the parashas, it's been explained numerous times. Even though we're normally told that only from Bereshis until Shivasa B'Tammuz does the haftarah match the theme of the parasha, and from there on, as the Torah explains, it's really about things that are associated with the time of the year, like the 3 Puranusa haftarahs before Tisha B'Av, the Shiva Denechemta after Tisha B'Av. Mikom Mokim. Despite that, Kevin Shekol in the Torah Medu Yokim Hem B'Yosa, seeing as everything in Torah is so absolutely precise. Move on. It's understood. Shagam haftarah shenikvu b'Shabbosis asher miyud zayin tamas ve'ilach lefi azman chulei. Even those haftarahs that are determined to match the time of year, haftarahs every year, miyah b'shar parashas Pinchas amates chulei, starting from the first of the Shloshah Devorim. Haftarahs Chazon b'Parashas Devorim, the one we're going to focus on, which is Shabbos Chazon. Yeshlan Shaychus the Parashas and Ikros b'Shabbos Seinu Minyan Parashas Chulei. They also link to the theme of the parasha. It's not only about the time. Hagam shebi koronik for lifi azman lifi ha'ma'ura, even though they are primarily associated with events that happen at these times of the year. This is especially so this week, Shabbos Chazon. Not only is the Haftarah Chazon, but we name the whole Shabbos the Shabbos of Chazon of vision, which implies that Chazon is the theme not only of the Haftarah, not only of the Parasha, but of the entire Shabbos. So let's find a common denominator between the Haftarah and the Parasha. One of the similarities between the Haftarah and the Parasha is the primary thrust of Shabbos Chazon is Yeshayahu Navi is rebuking the Jewish people and telling them to do tshuva ready. And despite all the harshness, the conclusion of the Haftarah is about the Geulah. I'll return your judges like in the past. Tzion will be redeemed through Torah and its captives through tzedakah. So in other words, it's a parasha that has rebuke of the Jewish people that ends on a highly positive note about Geulah. Likewise, the same theme is in Parashas Devorim. Even though Devorim is Moshe Rabbeinu rebuking the Jewish people, the conclusion of Parashas Devorim, Eretz Yisrael, describes the Jewish people going into Eretz Yisrael with a very positive message. Don't fear the inhabitants of Canaan, because they, your God, will fight for you. Now, it's not just the fact that it ends off on a positive note. Halacha tells us that the conclusion of a concept in Torah really defines what it's all about. Move on. From that we can understand even though the theme of the Haftarah is Puranius, something negative, and within the 3 Haftarahs of Puranius, Haftarah Chazon, Shabbos Chazon is the harshest of them all. But the primary message of that Haftarah, as illustrated in its conclusion, is Geulah. And of course, a Haftarah is in a sense a conclusion of the parasha that we just read. It's only logical that likewise the summary and the ultimate purpose of this entire Parashas Devorim is also Geulah. So there's something unusual. The theme outwardly seems to be so negative, and yet embedded in it very clearly is a message of the highest positive, Geulah. That's why you'll notice that in the Likutei Torah, which the Tzemach Tzedek arranged the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim to suit the Parashas, Parashas Devorim only has a single Maimor, and it's not on the Parasha. It's on a pasuk from the Haftarah about redeeming Tzion and its captives. There's no Maimer in the Likutei Torah this week on the Parasha. And the answer is because Tzion b'mishpat tipodeh, the theme of Geulah, is the core message and theme of Parashas Devorim. So this seems a little bit unusual that the whole theme of the parasha is dafka noted in the Haftarah, over the Gufa B'Sim Haftarah, more specifically at the end of the Haftarah, and Efshel Omri B'Chol HaParashas, maybe that applies to every parasha. You don't find this in any of the other parashas. That the Maimah will only be based on a pasuk from the Haftarah, and specifically from the end of the Haftarah. Yes, we have Parashas Bereshis, which starts Ashal Mayim Kisi, but there are other Maimorim there as well. Why is it specifically in Parashas Devorim that this is the case, that there's a pasuk from the end of the Haftarah that is chosen to represent the whole parasha? Because this notion of the Haftarah reflecting on the parasha and the theme of the Haftarah capturing the whole theme is something which is very specific to the topics of Golus and Geulah. What does that mean? Because Golus and Geulah are far more connected than we imagine, and we're going to see this based on a medrash. The Medrash Yalkut says at the beginning of Yirmiyah, the lion will rise up, or did rise up, under the zodiac sign of the lion and destroyed Ariel, which is code for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Yalkut, the lion refers to Nebuchadnezzar, as the pasuk says that the lion came out of the thicket. It's referring to Nebuchadnezzar. When did it happen? B'mazal Aryeh, in Chodesh Menachem Av, which is the zodiac sign of the lion, Leo. At Golus Yishlayim b'Chodesh Hamishi, as the pasuk says, that they were taken into Golus in the 5th month, which is Menachem Av. V'hechiv Ariel, Havei Ariel Kiryas Chana David. And what is Ariel? It says a pasuk that says Ariel. Ariel, that refers to the place, the city where David rested, which is Yerushalayim. Why did this happen? Continues the Yalkut Alman Nas, in order that a lion should rise up again in the month of the lion and rebuild Ariel. The first lion there refers to the Eibishter. Like the pasuk tells us, if the lion roars, who shall not be afraid? That refers to the Eibishter. How do we know it will be in the month of Av? Because the pasuk tells us, I will transform your mourning into rejoicing. V'yivnei Ariel, and you'll build the Beis HaMikdash, because the pasuk says, "Ben Yerushalayim Hashem nitchei yisod yikanes," that David is going to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash and bring the Eden back. So, and we have to understand, everything in Torah is so specific, and we don't just use poetic language. Why do we have to use this imagery of the lion both to describe the destruction and the rebuilding? But why doesn't it just say simply, Nebuchadnezzar came in the month of Av, in order that David should come and reverse it? Why the lion? In that medrash is an opportunity to address a very serious question about the concept of destroying the Beis HaMikdash. What's the serious question? Halacha psuka here, it's a clear halacha. Any person who breaks vessels, rips clothing, destroys a building, derech hashchasa, in a malicious way, over bebal tashchis. He is breaking the prohibition in the Torah against destruction. Yes, sir, al-kain, besides which, but no, if he's a bal tashchis, besides the generic prohibition against destroying things, there's a specific restriction with the Beis HaMikdash. After the Torah tells us to destroy idolatrous places in Eretz Yisrael, it tells us don't do that to Hashem's home. From which we learn that you're not allowed to even destroy a piece of the Beis HaMikdash. Like the Rambam says, then any person who destroys even one stone of the Mizbeach or the Heichal or between the Ulam and the Mizbeach in a destructive way, like that person is whipped, gets lashes. Because the pasuk says that you have to destroy the idolatrous altars, and don't do it to the Eibishter. If you cannot damage one little stone, you certainly can't destroy the whole Beis HaMikdash. But the Rambam lists this as one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Do not destroy the Beis HaMikdash or a shul or a Beis Medrash. Which then raises the question: seeing as the Eibishter instructs us with his mitzvahs, as we know that the Eibishter whatever the Eibishter tells us to do, he does. How did the Eibishter allow the Goyim to destroy the Beis HaMikdash? Not only that, it was under his guidance and direction. It was his mission. The pasuk tells us, I'm sending to my servant Nebuchadnezzar, basically instruction or permission to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Now you'll say, well, maybe we didn't deserve the Beis Hamikdash anymore because of our behavior. If the problem is that the Yidden did not deserve the Beis Hamikdash, they could have hidden the Beis Hamikdash from us. Like we see, the Mishkan was hidden away. And Eicha tells us that the gates of the Beis Hamikdash sank into the ground. And we know that the menorah and others were hidden. The Aron was hidden. So why does they have to destroy the Beis Hamikdash if we don't destroy it, if we don't deserve it? Put it where we can't access it. Okay, so there are two averos over here that we have to explore: Bal Tashchis and Lo Sasenke. Bal Tashchis, you can work around it. So perhaps the way to address the fact that this is destructive, which you're not allowed to do, will base it on what the Chazal tell us about the pasuk that says the Eibusher exhausted his anger. Says the Chazal, what do you mean exhausted his anger? That the Eibusher poured out his wrath on stones and wood, and that way spared us. He didn't pour out his anger on us. And that's why it says Mizmor Le'asaf, even though the Tehillim is describing how Goyim came into the Heichal and destroyed it, it's a Mizmor, it's a song, it's not a dirge. Why? Because it saved us. And maybe that would explain why destroying the Beis Hamikdash is not Bal Tashchis, a destructive act. Because the only time a person transgresses Bal Tashchis is if their intention is malicious and damaging. But if the intention is to repair, to fix, then you're allowed to do it if there's no other way. So if you want to renovate your house, you have to break down the wall. That's not Bal Tashchis. There is no other way to renovate the house. So therefore, even though it looks like kilkul, it looks like you're doing something negative, it's acceptable. It's not Bal Tashchis because it's ultimately positive. We see a similar concept with the prohibitions of Shabbos. The general rule is that if a person does something which is destructive, they are not liable for punishment on Shabbos. For example, if a person just randomly ripped clothing or burnt them or broke something in a malicious way, the person is not liable for having broken Shabbos. You're not allowed to do it, but you're not liable. But nevertheless, if a person is angry and therefore rips their clothing and that kind of helps them to regulate, or the person rips their clothing because they've lost a family member for whom they are required to rip their clothing, then the person is liable for breaking Shabbos. Why? Because that helps regulate, it helps calm the person. And it quiets their impulses. So therefore, because you're settling agitation, that is something positive. It's like repair for which a person is liable. So let's plug that theory into the concept of destroying the Beis Hamikdash. It's like the person ripping their clothing in anger. If by destroying the Beis Hamikdash, the Eibusher is protecting us, great. That is a positive act. It's not Bal Tashchis. Especially when you consider that if the Eibusher, so to speak, poured out his anger on the inanimate objects and not on the people, then you could say destroying the Beis Hamikdash for us is a destructive act with a positive benefit. Because there's no other way to protect us other than destroying the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, there's no issue of Bal Tashchis. Great, put that to bed. It's not an issue, but we have another halachic problem. But the prohibition against destroying the Beis Hamikdash, because we can't treat Hashem's home like we treat lahavdil, idolatrous places. Even though the Rambam points out that the real issue with that is if the person is malicious and looking to do damage. And the Kesef Mishnah says if you have to do repair work on the Beis Hamikdash, you might also have to pull out a rock and break it or whatever in order to do what you have to do. That's acceptable because it's for repairs. The only time that's acceptable is what you're breaking has to be to fix that particular thing itself, not to break, because later on we're going to do something else. Have a look at what the Ramah says in Halacha with regards to a shul. You're not allowed to destroy or remove one part of a shul unless it's to rebuild. But if you're dismantling part of the shul for another purpose, even if that purpose is a mitzvah, you're not allowed to do it. Because the only time you're allowed to be destructive in Hashem's territory is if it's to rebuild there and then. So how can you destroy a Beis Hamikdash and now it's thousands of years later? The That's why the Medrash had to tell us, firstly, the image of the lion that runs both to describe the destruction and to describe the restoration. And he uses the expression almenas, lehadgish, because the Medrash wants to emphasize that the Eibusha did not destroy the Beis Hamikdash for the purpose of destruction. As the halacha says, you're allowed to dismantle in order to rebuild in that place. That's what the Eibusha is doing here. The only reason that the Eibusha destroys the Beis Hamikdash is almenas, in order to have the opportunity to rebuild an even greater Beis Hamikdash, as we'll see. And in that context, this is not a prohibition of breaking the Beis Hamikdash, to the contrary. The act is an act of breaking that is classified as an act of building. You don't call it destruction, you call it building. When I'm breaking down the wall because I'm renovating my house, I don't say, today I'm breaking my house, come back next week, I'm going to be building my house. When I break down the wall, I say I'm building my house. That's why the Yalkut repeats the same descriptive term again and again. Keeps using the same kind of expression. Why? Because it wants to clarify and emphasize that you have to understand that the deeper message of this apparent destruction is construction. To what extent? The name we give for the destruction, Aryeh, is the same name we give for the construction, Aryeh. Again, I'm not breaking my house, I'm fixing my house. Especially when you consider that in Hebrew, a name captures the essence of what something is all about. This gives us a tremendous insight into the concept of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the first, but especially the second Beis Hamikdash. The Yalkut is referring to the construction of the third Beis Hamikdash, which the Eibishter will do, as the Yalkut said, that the Eibishter is going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. That construction of the third Beis Hamikdash is not something that will happen in the future. That construction began immediately at the time of the destruction. Yes, okay, not only at the same time. The entire objective of destroying the Beis Hamikdash is only solely to rebuild. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bikesh letakenes Beis Hamikdash. The Eibish's intention was to improve the Beis Hamikdash, fix the Beis Hamikdash. That it shouldn't have the limitations it previously had, which was binyan debar nashein loikiyam, human construction that cannot live indefinitely. The Eibish's intention was dismantle that limited Beis Hamikdash to build a divinely built Beis Hamikdash that will last forever. That's why there was a destruction of the first, but certainly the second Beis Hamikdash. In order to get to the ultimate version of the Beis Hamikdash, the third, which will be the Eibish's construction, which means the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is not actually destruction; it is construction of something fundamentally better. That will help us understand in a far deeper way an unusual medrash which describes that there was this Arab who overheard a Jewish person's cow that made some kind of unusual sound at the time the Beis Hamikdash was being destroyed. So he said, that indicates that your Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed right now. The taker from Miyad and immediately afterwards the cow made another noise. He said, that means that the one who will redeem you has been born. What does that mean? It's not only saying, okay, there had to be a Mashiach at any given time, and so there was a Mashiach who was born then. And the message is not even just to say that from the minute of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, there's already a Mashiach ready to take us out of Golus. It's more than that. That's what's happening over here is at the moment of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, that is the moment of preparation for Geulah. There's a simple reason for this. Seeing that the Yidden, if they do tshuva, Mashiach has to come immediately. And even if we're spiritually asleep during Golus, our hearts are awake to the Eibishter. So therefore, Mashiach has to be ready immediately. That immediately, if we do tshuva, Mashiach can come. So that's a very powerful message over here, that even at the moment the Beis Hamikdash is being destroyed, there's preparation for Geulah. No, it's more than that. It's deeper than that. Ein kol hefsek zman hefsek rega. There isn't a delay of even a rega, which is the tiniest fraction of halachic time, between the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the Geulah and the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash. Not only we are ready that should we do tshuva, Mashiach could come. There's no hesitation between the Churban and already the process of Geulah and already the process of revealing the Beis Hamikdash. The fact of the birth of Mashiach, that implies that in our physical world, the Mashiach path has begun. The Geulah has begun. The building of the third Beis Hamikdash has begun immediately. We don't see it. All we see is the destruction. And we're therefore bound by halacha that we have to mourn at this time, because all we can experience is the loss. But let's remember that fasting is intended to wake us up to do tshuva. As the Rambam says right at the beginning of the laws of Tinius, this concept of fasting, it's part of the process of doing tshuva. And why do we fast? Why do we have Tisha B'Av? Why do we have to do tshuva? So we could translate that process that is already happening at a level we cannot see into something pragmatic we could experience. The binyan Beis Hamikdash kipshutai. Inyan zeh shaschalas binyan habayis has a take of mamish lechurban mishum shazoi kol tachlisa shul achurban l'shem tikkun habayis. So this idea that at the moment of destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is the moment of construction of the ultimate Beis Hamikdash. In other words, in the moment of Golus is the beginning of Geulah. You actually see this in the original Golus in Mitzrayim. Matzanu mefurish kfar begolus harishon Golus Mitzrayim. The minute the Eibishter tells Avraham Avinu that there will be a Golus, and that's a decree that they will be subjugated to a foreign nation, immediately tells them, but they'll come out with great wealth. What does that mean? The meaning is that the entire purpose of the Golus in Mitzrayim was only to facilitate the elevation of the Jewish people, the Rechush Gadol that would raise us up spiritually. So that we could then receive the Torah. It's just that when the Jews are actually physically in Egypt as slaves, they can't sense any of that. But as the Gemara tells us, they were willing to compromise on this great reward just to get out of Mitzrayim, because they couldn't sense that Mitzrayim was building them into this unique people that they were going to emerge as. And this is the deeper understanding of why Shevet Levi were never slaves. Because we know that Shevet Levi never stopped learning Torah, and therefore they remain dedicated to the mitzvahs passed down through the generations. They knew and felt and experienced even while they were in Mitzrayim. They understood, they felt it was a real experience for them, that this entire Golus is the facilitation of the Geulah that's going to follow. Didn't feel like Golus for them. Seeing as every Golus is, in a sense, a duplicate of what happened in Mitzrayim, and it's called after Golus Mitzrayim. The same thing applies to all the Golus, especially our current Golus. What is discernible, what is experience is. There was a time of Churban, there was a time at the beginning of Golus, there's another time later on, the beginning of Geulah. But at a deeper level that might be deeper than what we can experience. The entire purpose of Golus is the Geulah, and the greatness of that Geulah that will happen, the so-called Rechush Gadol that we will experience. That means the very first moment of Golus is Geulah. Because what is Geulah? It is our achievement through Golus coming to fruition. So the minute we begin that process, Geulah has begun. And this is not at some elevated level just from the Eibishter's perspective. This is something that reflects in how we behave as Jewish people, how we serve the Eibishter. That's why it's the cow of the guy who makes the noise. Because this concept of we are now in the first step towards Geulah is so tangible, even the person's animal could feel it. Take that a step further, as the Alter Rebbe famously tells us in Tanya, the ultimate spiritual state, which is the time of Mashiach, and specifically Tchias HaMeisim, which is the revelation of the Eibishter in an unlimited, infinite way, dafka in our physical world, is completely contingent on our efforts and investment during the course of Golus. And seeing as this incredible achievement and revelation that will happen in the time of Mashiach is the product of our efforts now, move on, you could understand. That must mean that whatever we're doing in our service of the Eibishter has embedded within it already this incredible Geulah Yelikus. It's going to happen when Mashiach comes. We don't see it, but it's there. We cannot see it with our very physical perspective. But tzaddikim, particularly the Rabbeim, who have bright, clear eyes, they see in the Golus, both in the darkness and difficulty of the Golus, as well as in our avodah, they see us in the Geulah. They see the Geulah in it. And with that, we're going to get a fascinating perspective on a very controversial subject in Judaism. In a very strange concept with regards to determining a time for Mashiach to come. The Gemara says clearly in Sanhedrin, a curse on those people who try to calculate the date for Mashiach's arrival. The Rambam says the same thing, and his book is a book of halacha, which means there's no debate over here. People should not try to calculate the time for Mashiach. And he quotes the Gemara. And yet you find many great Jewish leaders saying this is a time for Mashiach to come. Besides what's brought in the Gemara, there are people throughout the ages who said this time frame, ideal time for Mashiach. And besides that, here's irony, The Rambam, who writes clearly, Tipach Atzma, Tipach Rucham, that there should be a curse on people who calculate the date of Mashiach, puts one in a Geras Teimon. But after the Rambam's time as well, great Jewish leaders who identify times for Mashiach to come. Even the Alter Rebbe established a case of when Mashiach should come, and afterwards they said that's when the Likutei Torah was published. So how could that be? How could it be that you're not allowed to determine the time when Mashiach's coming, and yet great tzaddikim do it? In a bir hadavar bepashtus, so the meaning is the Gemara says that this is the problem with determining a time for Mashiach to come. The concern is people are going to say Mashiach's coming on this date. That date passes, Mashiach doesn't come, and people lose faith in Mashiach. The Rambam says this clearly in that same letter that he addresses to the communities in Yemen, where he says this is going to weaken the Jewish people. Because maybe they'll make the mistake of thinking the date we believe Mashiach was due has passed, therefore he's not coming. And that is going to rob people of faith in Mashiach, and that's bad, obviously. And therefore, the Chachamim daven that these people should lose their minds. They should not be able to come through with their predictions of when Mashiach is supposed to come. But when you have a great tzaddik who determines a time for Mashiach to come, that's a completely different message. Their intention there is very lofty intention. As the Rambam also describes about Reb Sadia Gaon, that he made certain due dates for Mashiach to come, and the Rambam gives a very positive spin on that. Why? Because these were times where the Jewish people were very depressed and had very corrupted perspectives. So what the leadership did is they wanted to rally the people with a sense of a due date for Mashiach to come. And that strengthened their faith. Don't worry, things will get better. And they aroused within them hope for the time of Mashiach. By telling them, it's close, don't give up hope. Even though ordinarily the Torah said you may not do this. That's what the Rambam says. The Rebbe is going to take it a step deeper. Based on what we've said, that embedded within Golus is the Geulah, and embedded within our avodah is the Geulah of Ein Sof. Seeing as the great tzaddikim, they look at what you and I are doing, and they see within what we're doing, they see the unfolding of Geulah. And they see how our avodah brings Geulah closer. And every day that passes in Golus, they see the accumulation of this great wealth, this great spiritual revelation that we are generating. And they see that you each day there's increase until eventually you hit a threshold. Therefore they revealed when each threshold would be reached. So they're saying, that date, we're going to have a whole new layer of Mashiach that we've achieved. Why did they do it? To encourage the Yidden. If we get told there's a due date for Mashiach to come, from when we're given that information until that date comes, we're expected, obviously, to invest more, to try harder, so that we should actually succeed in not only crossing that threshold, but crossing the ultimate threshold. Any time that any of the greats of our history calculated times for Mashiach, they did so to encourage us and to infuse us with ability to do better in our avodah. So that our avodah should align with this anticipated revelation that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So there's no question that kind of calculation of times of Mashiach is not forbidden. As the Rambam noted, that there's certain kinds of kitzim you're not allowed to do. Great tzaddikim who are able to see how much we have achieved, which we don't see. And when you see how much we have achieved, that is only going to increase how much you praise the Yidden, how much you love the Yidden, how much schus the Yidden have. They have a responsibility to share this. Because that will encourage us. We'll see how much we've achieved, how well we're doing, how close we're getting. And that links directly to the unique name of this parasha and the Shabbos that is named for this parasha with the Haftarah, which is Shabbos Chazon. The simplest way to say why is this called Shabbos Chazon, because this is the Haftarah that starts with those words Chazon Yeshayo, which at face value is all the negative that he saw. What did he see? He saw that the Jews were not behaving as they should, and he told them that. On the other hand, we also know the famous word Rabbi Parich quoted from Rabbi Yitzchak Braditcheva. Shabbos Chazon is a vision. The Shabbos that this is a Shabbos where each of us is shown a sign or a vision at some level, obviously subconsciously, of the future Beis Hamikdash. Based on what we've said, these are not two contradictory things. There's the Chazon of seeing the faults and rebuking the Jewish people, and the Chazon of Mashiach. No, it's the same thing. They're completely intertwined. In fact, they follow on, as we've said. The minute the Churban happens, it's already Geulah happening. At the time of Churban Beis Hamikdash, and at the worst time to commemorate Churban Beis Hamikdash, Shabbos Chazon leading into Tisha B'Av. In that environment, you're at the moment of the Churban. What are you seeing? You're not seeing Churban, you're seeing Beis Hamikdash. You're seeing that this is day one of the Geulah. With that perspective, a Yid is not overwhelmed by the challenges of the Golus. And naturally, if you're not overwhelmed by the challenges of the Golus, then your avodas Hashem is off the charts. And that will cause the construction of the third Beis Hamikdash, which is already ready on high. And they will actually see, not in some subconscious way, we'll actually see the Beis Hamikdash. It will be something visual and tactile and tangible in our physical world. The Eibush is going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash speedily, and it should really happen in this month of Menachem Av.